Okay, I hope you're in a comfortable chair, have a cup of tea or something, and ready to settle down and really get into giant steps because we're going to go deep. I'm Ron Drotos from KeyboardImprov.com, and thanks for being here. My journey through the real book, number 133, which, yes, is Giant Steps, the seminal tune by John Coltrane. And yes, we're going to go deep, and I'm going to tell you some things that people who knew Coltrane told me about him. And I haven't heard some of this stuff anywhere else on the internet, certainly not how I'm going to present it here. So yeah, just get comfortable and let's go for it. So Giant Steps is, it's one of those tunes, the 3 or 4 tunes in jazz history that when it was composed and afterwards for many years was considered one of those things you had to be able to play to prove yourself. You know, back in the 20s, it was James P. Johnson's Charleston. You know, stride, very fast stride. Then it became Cherokee with its bridge that went between 3 different notes. You know, which Charlie Parker used for his tune Coco, and went through a few different keys jazz musicians weren't used to playing at the time, very fast. And then, yes, late 50s, Giant Steps became that tune. So, a couple of things. It has a version of what's known as Coltrane Changes in it. The other version, which may be more the official Coltrane Changes, I'm not really sure, is Countdown. But the basic idea is that he was experimenting with chord progressions that tonicized keys that were distantly related, meaning, in this case, thirds apart. And, Beethoven would shift between thirds too, maybe not as quickly and rapidly as this, but he would have a section that was in G and the next one might go to E flat, things like that. So it's not like he made this up, but he did them very rapidly in a mathematical and kind of symmetrical fashion. So, for instance, the first phrase, first part of the tune, takes the keys of B major, and then a major third down, G major, and then E flat major. You hear how different they are? So you have a tonic here, and then and after he starts on B, what he does is he goes to the 5 chord of the next one. So, because the 5 chord points to 1, that's why it's called dominant, right? So you have B, and then you have a 5-1 relationship in G. D, and then a 5-1 relationship in E flat. Right? And then he does a 2-5-1 in G again. And then he does the 5-1 in E flat, then the 5-1 in B. That's the first half of the song. And then the second half is 2 5-1s in these same keys. So it's a 2-5-1 in E flat. Then he goes up a major third, 2-5-1 in G, 2-5-1 in B, and then 2-5-1 in E flat again. And then he gets us back to the beginning with a 2-5-1. So at the same time, it's utterly modern and innovative for the time, and shocking in that it doesn't have a firm home plate. I mean, what key is Giant Steps in? You could say it's in B, but it really ends up in E flat, and nothing's. It's being displaced constantly. Almost like a 12-tone tune. Like serialism in classical music. There's no real tonic that's established for very long. It's sort of like we're here, 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 here. And in a sense, it's similar to Arnold Schoenberg, who invented serialism, 12-tone music. It's similar to his definition of that, because he didn't call that atonal. He called it like pantonal, like everywhere I am is home. So it's like we're home here, and now we're home here, and then we're home here, and then we're home here, and now we're home here. So you're just bouncing around, but you feel at home. But it's happening so quickly. Do we really feel like that? So it was one of these tunes that, everybody's dream, jazz musicians. I want to be able to sit down and play Giant Steps. It's something that people practice for years and years and years, and I've spent many hours going. Hearing these chord changes. Really trying to hear them so that when you play faster, you can follow it. You can think fast. It's not just playing fast, it's thinking fast. So here's the thing about giant steps. When I was in college, I got to study with a wonderful composition teacher who spent a lot of time with me, really helped me out a lot. His name was Hale Smith, Hale Smith. And he was known sort of as one of those insiders in the classical composition world. He won the first BMI Composers Award, which I think, I don't know, when was that? I don't know. Let's see, he was born in 25, 45, somewhere in the 40s probably. He won that and for his classical compositions. And I've seen Gunther Schuller and the New York Philharmonic do his pieces, and American Composers Orchestra. And also, though, he was known in the jazz circles. He played jazz piano and did arranging and composing. And Eric Dolphy had recorded some of his stuff. And Hale actually taught Eric Dolphy out of Hindemith's book, Elementary Training for Musicians. So that's how deep he was. Someone like Eric Dolphy went to him for lessons. They became good friends. When Eric went over to Europe with Mingus for that last tour before he died, he actually didn't know he was going to die, of course. And he left Hale and his wife, Juanita, all of his manuscripts and unreleased recordings for safekeeping. And they had them for decades until Blue Note Records approached Hale and asked if they could release some, and they did. So really insider, friends with Dizzy Gillespie, had performed with Dizzy, and Coltrane, John Coltrane, had played the sax on some of the recordings of Hale's pieces in the big band when Coltrane was just getting started. So Hale knew Coltrane too. And I remember I went in his office once, it was in the 80s, at UConn, University of Connecticut, and I was, 18 years old, and I said, what do you think of late Coltrane? Because I was listening to the past Giant Steps stuff, where he was playing outside for an hour over vamps and getting far out. And he said, Ron, you have to remember one thing about Coltrane. He was searching for something, but he hadn't yet found it when he died. He hadn't yet found it. He was still searching. So even though Coltrane's a great influence on so many people, I think sometimes people imitate a certain period of Coltrane's music and they think it's the end all and be all, or whatever the expression is. But it was just a stepping stone for Coltrane. He was still trying to find something to express, through his influences from East Indian music and world music in general, and modality and folk music, and yes, coming up with these very fast harmonic challenges. And the famous story with this is that he had practiced these for about a year, and then he brought the chords over to Tommy Flanagan, who was going to play piano on the recording, about a week before, and said, "Can you play these chords?" And Flanagan thought it was a ballad. He's like, "Oh yeah, I can improvise over this." And then Coltrane counts it off at the recording session, and Flanagan's struggling, poor guy, you can hear it on the recording, I think years later he recorded it himself just to show that he could play Giant Steps, but he didn't have a chance, he couldn't practice it for a year like Coltrane had, So very hard tune, especially at the time when it was new. Anyway, Coltrane was looking for something, and sure enough, he abandoned this, I don't know if there's any live recordings of him playing this. I don't know, maybe there is, but he didn't put this in his repertoire. It was too hard for everybody, and even he didn't continue playing this style after, 2 years or so. He would go to playing over these extended modal, where they just keep an E minor chord forever. And then yes, he would superimpose some of this stuff on top, but this wasn't something he continued. And this might be controversial to say, but it might have even been a dead end for him. And to play devil's advocate, I was experimenting with, one of the appeals of melody is that it has a tonic that we feel, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It's coming home. And we arrive home, and it feels satisfying. And I was having some fun. I'm like, what if we played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star through giant steps chord progression and see, does it give us that same feeling of being centered and being home and satisfaction? And it sounds something like this. It doesn't, you know. It doesn't, you know, and that's maybe something that gives us a clue as to why Coltrane didn't continue in this vein, to be honest, just to give my opinion there. You might feel very differently, you know, but it is a fun tune to play, you know, it's a challenge. So the other thing about this tune, the way I view it, with these tonal centers that are like these, boom, here's G, here's B, here's E flat, and they're just so boom, 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 these different colors. Sort of G is, you know, sort of like, what would we call it, like white, you know, and E flat is like spring green, and B is yellow, and it's like these big chunks of color. And it reminds me of this 20th century painter named Lionel Fenninger, and I'll put something in the video, so hopefully by now you'll see his stuff. He had a style that I think was called, it's sort of cubist, but it was called prismatic, or that style, prismatism, where it's like a prism, light shine through a prism, but you get these big chunks of color sort of next to each other. And that's the way I kind of think of giant steps. It's like, here we're in B, and now, oh, here we're in this, and now we're in this, and then it's like these prisms sort of shooting out. You know, the white ray goes through the prism and then comes out with the spectrum. That's what this is like to me. I'm not really great at math in terms of numbers, but I love geometry and shapes and how things are balanced in paintings and in books and in music, how the form, different sections relate to each other, like geometry, really. And so that's how I think of this harmonically and in terms of the form. The other thing is how are you going to play it on piano? Because, yeah, it can be fun to just sort of burn over the tune and, you know. But in a sense, it can be fun. You know, you can play a nice solo like that and everything. But to me, it's almost like that Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. You know, where it's never quite settling in and this. So one way I like to play giant steps is to think of it as, in very pianistic terms, as a continuous variation, almost like Bach's variations, I think, it's C minor, where it's just an 8-measure Passacaglia, and each 8 measures has different texture. Like he might do, you know, no, Beethoven, sorry, Beethoven. Bach has one too in C minor, but I'm thinking of the Beethoven one, where he might go, you know, that's one 8-measure thing. And then the next one will be just, kind of making this up, I don't remember it, but it's a different musical texture, pianistic texture, every 8 measures. And for me, giant steps can really be like that, because it's so beautiful. These chords are very rich, and we lose them when we play them too fast all the time. So you could do something like, I used to play this as a bossa nova, and when I do background music gigs, you know, kind of go. Slows it down so I can hear the beauty of it too. But the other thing is, it does lend itself to these sort of prismatic, going back to that Lionel Fenninger painting style, these you know, like, you know, these beautiful, it's like the colors shooting out. And so for instance, you know, you could start off with one texture. let it do, whatever starts to develop, then take it in that direction and just have this journey through pianistic textures for 5-10 minutes. That's where I get excited about this tune even more than really just soloing over it. So with all that in mind, let me give it a try. And I guess I went through all that because I want to invite you to explore those things for yourself. So here we go. Giant steps. something like that is a giant step. I get a sense of why Coltrane called it that. I don't know. Or maybe he was just talking about it's a giant step between these key relationships. But what a tune, and there's so many possibilities in there. I think you get a sense of that from the way I was explaining it before. And thanks for being here. The whole series, Journey Through the Real Book, is I think one of my contributions to jazz history, practice, performance, interpretation, keeping this alive, into the future too. But certain of the videos, like Wayne Shorter's Dolores, and then Giant Steps, where we're going even deeper, I think could be, at least I consider it a real contribution in the sense that I get to share things like the story or the opinion of Hale Smith, my teacher, who had worked with Coltrane and Dolphy and was thinking, he was still searching. You're not going to really hear that anywhere else, and it's really, really gratifying for me to be able to share that with you here. So thanks for sticking with this. It's really a 20 or 30 year exploration. I was reading an interview a long time ago with Michel Camillo, the pianist, and he was saying that he always comes back to practicing giant steps because I think he might have described it as a koan, like one of these riddles that you ponder. It's sort of like you work on this and it helps everything else you do, whether you're going to perform this or not. It's just one of those tunes. So spend some time with this, spend years with this, spend decades with this, come back to it and explore all these things for yourself. Thanks for being here, and good luck with your playing. Good luck with your playing.